Okay.
Okay. And I think we'll just get started if that's okay with you, Congressman.
Let's go for it. Forgive me. We had votes. I ran back to join you guys.
Thank you so much, understanding how incredibly busy you are. So let me begin by just saying good evening to everyone. I'm Dana Cunningham, the Dean of the Tisch College of Civic Life here at Tufts. Welcome to this evening's Tisch College Solomont Speaker Series Forum, a conversation with United States Congressman Jamie Raskin. It's wonderful to see so many members of the Tufts community joining us virtually. We hope those of you who are local will be able to join us for our upcoming in-person conversations with Republican Senator Tim Scott later this week on Friday, April 1st, and Democratic Congressman Peter DeFazio on Monday, April 11th, both on our Medford and Somerville campus. You can register for those events on Tisch College's website, which will be linked in the chat. Before we get started, let me thank our co-sponsors, the Political Science Department and the Civic Studies Program, for their support tonight and throughout the semester. Also, as always, thanks to Alan and Susan Solomont for their support of the speaker series. I'm pleased to introduce and reconnect with our guest this evening, my former college classmate, Congressman Jamie Raskin. Congressman Raskin represents Maryland's 8th Congressional District. He is serving his third term on the House Judiciary, Oversight and Administration Committees, and his second term on the House Rules Committee. In January 2021, he served as the lead House manager in the second Senate impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump, ending with a vote to convict the president for inciting an insurrection against the government. Last summer, he was appointed by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to serve on the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the US Capitol. Prior to serving in Congress, Raskin was a 3-term state senator in Maryland and a professor of constitutional law at American University's Washington School of Law. This evening, he joins us to discuss his recent book, Unthinkable Trauma, Truth, and the Trials of American Democracy, documenting the 45 days of the start of 2021 as he and his family was confronted with the loss of his son, Tommy, to suicide just days before the insurrection at our nation's capital, as well as leading the impeachment effort of President Donald Trump during a time of enormous personal and collective tragedy. Congressman Raskin's compelling book is both the story of a father coping with his pain and a valuable reminder of the ongoing struggle for American democracy and the perseverance that our Constitution demands from us all. I'm grateful he is here to speak with us on these important topics. Joining Congressman Raskin in conversation is Ambassador Alan Solomont, Dean Emeritus of Tisch College. Alan is a lifelong jumbo who is a Tufts undergraduate, a Tufts parents, a visiting instructor, and founding board chair of Tisch College before serving as its dean from 2014 through 2021. He previously served as the United States Ambassador to Spain and Andorra during the Obama administration. It's a real treat to have Alan back, albeit virtually, with us tonight in a role he's played expertly many times throughout his time as dean. And it is through his and his wife Susan's generous support of the speaker series that we are able to make events like this one possible. Thank you to Alan and to Congressman Raskin for joining us tonight. Over to you, Alan.
Thank you very much, Dean Cunningham. I just want you to know how wonderful it is for me to be back at Tisch College, even virtually. And I want to thank you so much, Dean, and my colleagues for inviting me to participate in this evening's conversation with my friend, Jamie Raskin. And I want to just thank Jamie for joining us this evening and also for sharing with us this amazingly honest and powerful book of his, Unthinkable, which I've been enjoying and profoundly moved. So let's get started with the conversation. And before we start talking about the book, if I may, you were a highly esteemed law professor long before you got into politics. So tell us, if you would, why you made the pivot from professor to public servant.
Well, first, let me thank Dana Cunningham. What a pleasure, what an honor it is to be with you. And Ambassador Solomont, thank you so much for this wonderful invitation. I'm really psyched to be here with you. Well, you know, I tell that story. I am basically an academic person. Most of my colleagues in Congress, when I'm on the floor, will call me professor and not congressman, which I take as really high praise. And I love universities. To me, there's nothing greater in the world than a university. And I love to write. I love to teach. I love to be with young people. And I do think that politics at its very finest is about education, educating people about the process and how it works, educating people about the institutions, and then about the issues and the different contrasting approaches we have to them, and then, you know, the kind of values that are embodied in different decisions we might make. So, but my grandfather was the first Jewish state legislator, state senator in Minnesota. And so I always knew politics was running in my blood at the same time. And it was back in 2006, and I picked up the newspaper to find that my state senator had introduced a pro-Iraq war resolution, and I was very opposed to the Iraq war, had been blocking marriage equality, and had been trying to expand use of the death penalty in Maryland. And, you know, we live in Silver Spring, Tacoma Park, which is like the progressive heartland of Montgomery County, which is a very blue jurisdiction in Maryland. And I said, you know what, I'm going to run for the state Senate. We have a part-time legislature, so you're able to do that and, you know, have another job so I could keep teaching. And everybody said it was crazy. My favorite story is that when I first announced, the Washington Post did an article about the race saying that Raskin's chances of victory are considered impossible. And 9 months later, we got 67% of the vote. And they had another article quoting a pundit who said Raskin's victory was inevitable. So we went from impossible to inevitable in 9 months because the pundits are never wrong.
Right.
But the story that I like to tell, because it involves my kids, is, you know, when we went out and announced we were going to do this, and it was very much a family effort, our kids, Hannah, Tommy, and Tabitha, and my wife, Sarah, and we went out and, you know, I made a big speech about everything I wanted to do. We wanted to abolish the death penalty and pass the strongest gun safety law in America, and pass marriage equality and reform the marijuana laws and all this. And a woman came up to me afterwards and she said, Jamie, great speech. I loved your speech, but one thing, take out everything that you got in there about gay marriage, because it's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. Even the gay candidates don't talk about it. And it makes you sound like you're really extreme, like you're not in the political center. And my kids were watching me to see how I would respond, because we didn't have that many attendees with us that day when we kicked off. But I said, you know, thank you, because your statement gives me an epiphany, because I realize that it's not my ambition to be in the political center, which blows around with the wind. It's my ambition to be in the moral center and to try to find what's right the best we can and bring the political center to us. And so that kind of became the governing motto of my career in political life, such as it is. And I think it's got a lot to do with why I decided to get into it.
So thank you for anchoring the moral center for so many of us. Your book is entitled Unthinkable Trauma, Truth, and the Trials of American Democracy. And it weaves together the story of your son, Tommy, his life and his death by suicide, the events of January 6th, and the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump. Why did you decide to write this book, and why did you choose to knit together these three elements the way you did?
I felt I had no choice, really. It was written in basically a 5-month reverie of insomnia. I mean, I would come home from the Capitol, get home at 7 or 8 usually, and then have dinner with Sarah and whoever else might be around. And then everybody would pretty much go to sleep. And then I would just stay up. And I decided, I could either spend the rest of my life obsessed with these events. We had lost Tommy on the last day of 2020, which was a catastrophe for our family and a great trauma. And then we had our graveside service on January the 5th in Montgomery County. And the very next day was January 6th. And I had brought with me, because the kids were trying to get me not to go, and I explained it was a constitutional imperative, and we only had a few vote majority over the Republicans, and COVID-19 was felling a lot of our people. And also Speaker Pelosi had asked me to help run our answers to the anticipated objections to the Electoral College votes coming in from Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, New Mexico, Wisconsin, and Nevada. And so we'd been getting ready for that for a few months. And so I had to be there. So anyway, I had brought Tabitha, our youngest, and our new son-in-law, Hank, who had recently eloped with our daughter, Hannah, in a COVID-19 Elvis Presley wedding they did out in Nevada.
You had to explain to everybody that Tabitha and Hank were not the couple, right?
Right, they were not the couple, right? But so anyway, but they were there, and there weren't many kids there that day because of COVID-19. It was actually a stroke of great good luck for us, because had more people brought their staffs with them and brought their families with them, and had there been tourist visits and so on, we could have had hundreds or even thousands of more people who would have been in the line of fire of the mob insurrection that stormed the Capitol and laid siege to Congress that day. But anyway, so I was, that was a week after we lost Tommy that the violent insurrection happened. A week after that, the Wednesday after that, the 13th, we impeached Donald Trump for inciting a violent insurrection. And Speaker Pelosi asked me to be the lead manager and to organize the team that would go over to the Senate to conduct the trial. And that period of preparation and then the trial in the Senate took the next month. It went right up to February the 13th. And so basically it was a 50-day period in my life where I was so traumatized and buffeted by events, but also uplifted by what we were doing to try to vindicate American constitutional democracy. I figured I had to write about what had just happened in order just to clarify things and understand what had happened to us as best as I could. So just when you ask why did I write it, I felt like I had no other choice, and it was a cathartic experience writing it, a profoundly cathartic thing at a terrible, terrible time for us. Writing it was cathartic. Reading it, as for the audiobook, was very difficult. It was really hard. But people are telling me who listen to it that they can tell that it was very difficult because my voice cracks and breaks at a number of points. And I've gone back several months later then and read things that I had written in the immediate aftermath of everything that had taken place.
Well, it is a very profoundly moving story, personal, honest, both of your own trauma, but also a trauma to American democracy. So I thank you for reporting for duty, as despite your enormous grief, and for then recording it for all of us and sharing it with it. It's an important lesson. Let me ask you though now to put on your professor's hat back on. And because well before Election Day, as you just mentioned, you and Speaker Pelosi were talking about how Donald Trump might try to manipulate the Electoral College vote and actually steal the election. And as a constitutional law professor, you actually know something about this, including how the 12th Amendment might figure in. And the speaker had asked you to brief her leadership team about this. Could you explain to the audience from a constitutional law standpoint what the conspiracy was actually?
Yeah, well, the Electoral College is, of course, an antique. It's quite obsolete. You know better than anybody, Alan, we spend tens of millions of dollars a year promoting American democracy and elections around the world. One thing we never succeed in exporting is our Electoral College system. It's not like there are a lot of countries writing their new constitution saying, yeah, and we really love your Electoral College system. We think we'll adopt that. It's problematic for a whole bunch of reasons, but it is filled with a bunch of booby traps. And it kind of depends on public good faith and the good faith of political actors, candidates, the party system, to basically go along with the will of the people as expressed in each state and then registered in the translation of their Electoral College votes, which is a winner-take-all system in 48 states. Maine and Nebraska do it by allowing the congressional districts each to have one elector and then two cast at large for the winner of the statewide vote. But I say that they're booby traps because there's so many phases to the process and there's so many junctures where if everybody's operating in good faith, everybody pretty much goes along with it. But if you've got a bad faith strategic actor who says, let's try to get the state legislatures to overthrow the popular will and just pass a new statute organizing electors for the loser, that could happen. If you've got a bad faith actor who says, let's try to get the governors, if they're on our team, not to issue certificates of ascertainment, that could happen. Just like a president or a candidate could, as Donald Trump did, go directly to election officials like Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in Georgia and say, we know we won in our state in Georgia, we know we won in your state, your numbers are wrong, just find me 11,781 votes. That could happen too, just like it could happen that somebody could say, well, January 6th, which is traditionally a day defined in the 12th Amendment, which says that on the first Wednesday of the first week of the new year after a presidential election, the House and the Senate meet in joint session to receive the Electoral College votes sent in by the certificates of ascertainment by the governor or by the Secretary of State of the particular states, and then count them. The Congress counts it, and then it's over. And the guy who sits next to me in the Rules Committee, Ed Perlmutter from Colorado, says that used to be a day of bipartisan merriment and celebration. It would take 20 minutes and they'd wrap it up and everybody would go get drunk and all the bars in Capitol Hill would be open and, making people punch and brandy and everything. Well, no more, because if you've got a bad faith actor, they can try to turn that process into another partisan brawl and referendum and indeed the terrain of a violent insurrection. So it's not as simple as just like electing a governor in Massachusetts where the votes are counted and somebody certifies it and it's over. There are a whole bunch of different ways in it. So anyway, we had prepared for that and had tried to get ready for each step of the process and get ready for the anticipated objections to electors being cast by particular states.
Although you said in another conversation that you had recently that Democrats prepared for everything except for reality.
Well, we had prepared for every parliamentary maneuver and objection that actually was made. We were ready for that. We also knew that there would be a mass wild protest called for by the president. We had even talked about it turning violent, but what we had never anticipated was the confluence and convergence of these two streams of action, so that there was a violent insurrection that unfolded parallel to an inside political coup focused on the vice president, Pence, and that they would intersect and then explode into a serious threat, the worst threat in the history of the Republic, to the peaceful transfer of power. And as a federal judge said yesterday, not only were there likely multiple federal crimes committed by the president and his coterie, but it nearly overthrew democracy. It could have permanently ended the peaceful transfer of power, said Judge Carter.
Yes. I want to ask you about that, but I may not get to it. Let me ask you about this. You, as you mentioned, you were the lead manager in the second impeachment trial. How do you explain the fact that after experiencing what they did, that only 10 of your Republican colleagues in the House voted to impeach? But on the other hand, what persuaded the 7 Republican members of the Senate who voted to convict?
Well, all of that is extremely complex and undoubtedly worthy of somebody writing a real book to analyze what happened. I mean, one of the things that was clear to me was that the members that we were in a best position to persuade were people who had some kind of independence from the Trump machine, either because they had great family wealth, like Mitt Romney, or family prominence, like Liz Cheney, or extremely strong moral and ethical convictions, somebody like Adam Kinzinger, something that set them apart, that did not make them a mere plaything in the hands of the majority of the GOP caucus, which is now operating, I must say, and I hope it doesn't sound partisan, but I know it will to some people, but it's now operating here much less like a modern political party and much more like an authoritarian cult of personality, where one person decides everything. And if that person decides that night is day and day is night, and I won the election and Joe Biden lost it, even though 62 different federal and state court judges rejected every claim of electoral corruption and fraud, even though Joe Biden was certified to have more than 7.5 million votes more than Donald Trump. Still, you got to believe it, Yeah, 10 struck me as low in the House, but this might be subtextual in your question. When we got over to the Senate, people were saying that we were going to get no votes. Maybe Mitt Romney, who had given a half a vote to the first impeachment team that had gone over the Ukraine shakedown. Yet we ended up with the most sweeping bipartisan vote to convict a president in an impeachment trial in American history. There have only been 4: Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton for doing you-know-what, Trump 1 and Trump 2. And we got by far the most bipartisan result. Now, you could say that the framers failed to anticipate the partisan hold that would exist in the imagination of politicians. They expected us to identify with our bodies, with our chambers, that if the House was moving for impeachment, all the House members would move to impeach, and then the Senate would act as a body, and so on. They expected people's ambitions to be intertwined with the chamber they served in, but of course it's turned out much more that our political and moral and philosophical perspectives seem to be much more marked by our partisan allegiances. It's unfortunate. I mean, the framers were kind of schizophrenic about political party, or what they called faction. Madison wrote in a very high-minded way in Federalist 10 about faction being the enemy of the public good and the public interest. And Jefferson, of course, had some great lines in his in his first inaugural address in 1801, where he said, we are all Republicans, we are all Federalists, and if I had to go to heaven only with a political party, I'd prefer not to go. But at the same time that they were as founders, they were quite high-minded and derisive about political parties. As politicians, they were hardball in the mud political brawlers. And I think, that schizophrenia about it runs all the way up till today, where, I could guarantee you there's somebody on the floor right now making a speech attacking partisanship. And then as soon as it's over, they will go back to their party caucus and be planning for the next bill or amendment or agenda or whatever. So look, I would say, I want to try to take a somewhat more academic and sober view about it. To my mind, political parties are a sign of health. I mean, one easy way to get rid of partisanship is you get rid of political parties, and then you got a one-party state. That's what Vladimir Putin wants. That's what every authoritarian wants. So if you have, a First Amendment that allows for freedom of speech and discourse and competition and so on, you're going to get partisanship. It's inevitable, and it's inevitable in any human social endeavor. Anybody who's been on a faculty will understand you build a faculty of 50 people, and within 2 weeks, they're going to be divided in different groups, and this group stands for this, and that group stands for that.
If you have a faculty of 50 people, you'll have 75 opinions.
There you go. But here's just to close the thought about partisanship. What I think about it is, okay, let's embrace partisanship for what it does for us. It helps us to organize the electorate, organize voters, get people engaged, articulate issues in a meaningful way to people, form an agenda, and then even translate it once the election has taken place into a policy agenda. That's all great. But having said that, when the election is over, we've got to remember we may be fighting like cats and dogs in the election. When the election's over, those of us who aspire and are lucky enough to attain to public office, we have got to remember where the word party comes from. It comes from the French word parti, which is a part. Like, your party is just part of the whole. And when you're in office, you've got to try to speak for the whole. And we do know how to do it, because if you come to my district office in Rockville with a problem about Social Security or Medicare or VA benefits or whatever it might be, we will go to bat for you. And we never once ask you, are you a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, a Green, a Libertarian, or whatever. We just ask, do you live in the 8th district? Because we're not allowed to serve anybody else. So we know how to be nonpartisan when we want to. And that's all I was asking the senators in the trial. I mean, I just gave them that lecture. I said, we know how to be nonpartisan. You've sworn an oath here to act dispassionately and objectively in rendering a verdict. And you must do that as an act of constitutional patriotism. And so fundamentally, that's what I'm asking for. Yes, let's be partisans as much as we need to. It's built into our system of government, but let's be constitutional patriots too.
Yeah. And there was a time, or there have been times, when partisanship actually forced people to collaborate. We could do a whole evening on why that's not the case now, but I wanted to broaden the lens for a bit and just talk about the international.
If I one point about that, Alan, I mean, and that can be great, and that can also be bad. I mean, obviously, from the perspective of third parties and independents, the one thing the two parties can always agree on is to make it as difficult as possible for anybody else to ever get into the system. And we shouldn't forget the Republican Party was a third party that took the place of the Whigs when the Whigs collapsed. And so we got to dismantle those barriers of to entry. Sometimes the lobbyists will come into my office and say, I've got a great bipartisan bill for you. And usually what it means is they want to buy the parties, and they want to buy one and get the other for free. So bipartisanship isn't necessarily always good. Partisanship is not necessarily always bad. And we sometimes we just have to think in a nonpartisan way or a supra-partisan way.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But you recently said it, something to the effect that democracy is in crisis around the world. We are fighting for our lives here. And that may be truer today than ever as we watch what's happening as the Ukrainian people fight back against Russia's invasion of their country. First of all, how do you see that tragedy playing out? And what do you think it will have an impact on the fight to safeguard democracy in the United States?
Absolutely. I'm hopeful. I'm exactly where President Biden was today. I mean, we want to verify everything that's happening, but I think Vladimir Putin has learned some hard lessons about the unity of the democratic world, about NATO, about American resolve, and about democratic governments and movements and peoples around the world standing with Ukraine, even while not launching a third world war, but standing with Ukraine, rendering military assistance, rendering economic assistance, rendering health assistance, assistance to the refugees, and so on, and punishing Putin's regime with very tough sanctions that have already begun to bring the Russian economy to their knees. So, that's going to be the ticket for democracies in the future. All of the autocrats and the dictators and the bullies and the despots have found each other. Putin in Russia, and Orban in Hungary, and Duterte in the Philippines, and El-Sisi in Egypt, and President Xi in China, and the homicidal crown prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, and you name it, and Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago. And that's their team. And so the democracies, and the historians will all tell us that democracies are slow to rise, but when they recognize the immensity and the nature of the threat arrayed against them, they will stand up. And I think we're witnessing that happening right now. Why does it take a while? Well, Democrats with the small d, people who are inclined towards democracy and liberalism, are leading their lives, and they understand the richness of experience, and they're with their families, and they're into music and art and so on. It's not all about power, 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 but that's what it's like in the autocracies. And so they get going first, but don't underestimate what the democracies can do. And this is why I feel very strongly about the work of the January 6th Select Committee. We are going to give the American people the truth that they deserve about this violent assault on our government to seize power. And we're going to lay that out in May in hearings, and we're going to give people a report that will be, I think, a very up-to-date report, because it might not just be written, it might include video and other kinds of media, so people understand what happened. But like Madison said, in a democracy, the people have the right to know the truth about the character of their rulers and the character of their government.
And what do you think the people are going to do with that? In other words, you're going to report the truth. What do you expect then the outcome of that to be? Well,
we're also going to make recommendations about how to fortify democratic institutions going forward against coup and insurrection. I'm hopeful that we arrive. We've been able to operate in a very bipartisan way in our committee, and we've had lots of unity. I hope that we will have unity about the recommendations, and I hope that they will go to everything from making sure we have, shatterproof windows on the first floor of the Capitol, all the way to securing the voting rights of the people, preventing one-party takeover of election processes, which is something is taking place around the country with voter suppression statutes and attempt to control the election machinery in a political way. We're going to have a lot of recommendations, and I hope that we will have a pro-democracy movement in the country that cuts across party lines, regional lines, and so on. And I'm very glad that we have brave Republicans like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger and Mitt Romney who are standing up
right.
for the constitutional framework.
This is not a question, but I want to quote something from your book, because you're giving us evidence of it as we have this conversation. You write, "For pretty much my whole life, my friends and family have teased me about my insanely ridiculous optimism, about being Mr. Rose-colored glasses. And further, you say that you always elevate hope over realism." So I was going to ask if that is still the case. I'm not going to ask that because it's very clear it is still the case. I guess I might ask, how do you sustain that optimism, And how can you advise the rest of us who sometimes get a little bit down in the dumps over the condition of things?
Well, who was it? Was it Gramsci who said, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will? And I have a lot more will than I have intellect. So maybe that's why the optimism portion is so exaggerated in my case. But look, my dad used to say to us, we were growing up, when everything looks hopeless, you're the hope. That's kind of the responsibility of a democratic citizen. We've got to be the hope. And especially for the young people. I mean, I derive a lot of hope from the young people. It's an amazing generation that's beyond racism and anti-Semitism and anti-immigrant and, homophobia. They're also a little beyond grammar, I've got to say, and but that's a separate problem. But it's an amazing generation, but they've also had a very tough run of it with COVID-19, with the opioid crisis, with the mental and emotional health crisis, which has engulfed so many families, not just ours. So I think those of us who are in the middle age or older camp, we've got to reach out to the young people and teach them what we know. And, in my case, what I do is this democracy summer.
I want you to explain that. I just have to put it, because this is where we really, I think, believe in something very, very much the same. I mean, Tisch College of civic life is a strong proponent of young people's involvement, both in civic life and in politics, and is probably the nation's leading authority on the civic and political engagement of young people, especially youth voting. So you created this program called Democracy Summer, originally for your own campaign. It's now a national initiative to engage young people in politics. So tell us about Democracy Summer.
Yeah, well, I actually started it. I tell the story in my book. I started it as a way to lure my own kids and nieces and nephews, like a dozen of them, to get involved in my campaign. And one of my nieces had said, what are we going to do? Put on our resume that we worked for our uncle's losing state Senate campaign? I said, okay, first of all, we're not going to lose. But secondly, you're not coming to work for my campaign. You're working with Democracy Summer. And her ears kind of perked up and said, what's that? And I said, we're going to get the greatest experts in the world on politics, on history, on public engagement, to come and talk to you. And that's basically been it. We've never had a single person say no to us, Alan, about coming and talking to the young people.
But you haven't asked all of the nation's leading experts, Jamie.
Well,
so
now that we're nationwide, they're coming in.
No, not me. No. I'm the pretty face. I'm going to send you the name. I'm going to send you some of our researchers at Tisch College to participate in this summer's summer democracy.
Well, that's great. I mean, when we started in Maryland, we were just using local people in Maryland and Washington, D.C. Now the D-Trip has endorsed and embraced Democracy Summer. We'll probably have 75. We could have up to 100 congressional districts involved in Democracy Summer. We're hoping, I think we're close to getting over 1,000 Democracy Summer fellows, which is what we call the high school and college kids. So I'm very excited to make the match with Tisch College. I'm of course aware of all the extraordinary work you've done on the question of youth participation in voting, and I'm amazed by the resources you've got there and the commitments you guys have. And hopefully I'll get to see you guys on my next trip to Boston.
Well, and I know I talked to some of your colleagues who are very excited to participate. So our Congresswoman in Medford, and also where I happen to live, is Catherine Clark, your dear friend, and I just was with her the other day, and she was bragging on how she's participating in Democracy Summer.
One of the things I love about Democracy Summer, by the way, is that the kids have both the academic part where we have seminars, and then they go out and they're registering voters and engaged in political activity, but they help each other. So we go to the swing districts, and so we will invade somebody's district. My friend, like Tom Malinowski's got a very competitive race. And so we're mobilizing. We'll have a couple hundred people come and knock on doors for Tom.
If I were still dean, I might try to get academic credit for some of the students who participate. I'm going to talk to the dean of Tisch College. Before we move to some audience questions, we have some limits on time, and I appreciate all the time you're giving, but I just want to ask you something that we think a lot about at Tisch College. If you could ask folks who are with you to do one thing, to take one action to help heal our democracy, what would it be?
Well, I'll tell you something Tommy Raskin said. Tommy taught Sunday school when he was in high school. And he asked all of the kids in his class to make friends with someone that they weren't already friends with, and with someone who they disagreed with about something, the kids. And I always liked that advice, Tommy always had that kind of idea, and it always affected me. I mean, and it fits me anyway, because I'm a middle child and I like trying to bring people together. And I'm a big believer in birth order. So I've always tried to make friends across the aisle. But look, we're in a national mental and emotional health crisis among young people. And, the Surgeon General has declared it, not just adolescents, but kids. He says we're in a crisis with kids. I mean, and some of it is the technology, and some of it is COVID-19, and some of it is climate change and feeling hopeless about the future. There's a lot going on in the heads and the hearts of our kids. So I think everybody should reach out to some kids, even, not your own kids necessarily. Reach out to some other kids and connect with them. And, there's a lot to inspire us there, but there's a lot that you can do to inspire them.
Fair enough. And I hope everybody who's listening this evening will take that to heart, and we'll take that lesson from Tommy Raskin. Okay. I think we have a couple of audience questions, if I'm not mistaken, Shanley, and I'm not exactly sure what I do now, but I'm going to rely on my able managers here to bring forward our questioners. There we go. Tell us your name, and if you're a student, and what's your, where you're from, or your major or something.
Hi, my name is Emily Good. I'm a Peace and Justice Studies and Community Health major from the class of 2004. Today I'm a psychotherapist, and I'm vegan for the animals, and reading about Tommy moved me very deeply. I was wondering how his passion specifically for animal rights and veganism has impacted your priorities and your choices.
Well, hey, Emily, thank you so much for that. I would be remiss if I did not also tell everybody to do what Tommy Raskin did and encourage other people in your life to become a vegan or a vegetarian for 1 week. Just try it for 1 week. And Tommy would always say, I'll take you out for your first dinner or your first lunch. And he converted dozens and dozens of people, never through guilt tripping, never through any kind of moral one-upsmanship, but always through telling people how great the food is and how wonderful it is to have a non-violent dinner and have your dinner not depend on, slaughter of animals. And I just became, Emily, the co-chair of our bipartisan caucus on alternative protein, because some of it is like beyond sausage and Impossible burgers. We're able, the scientists have been able to make just remarkably similar tasting burgers and sausage and everything. And Tommy was totally for that and totally enjoyed it. There were some vegans who were taking a kind of purist position that you shouldn't eat things that taste like meat. And Tommy just thought that was ridiculous. And he said, it's not a moral problem. We grow up being fed this food and we can break away from it. But it's not just that anymore. There's also, they need to come up with a much better name for this, but what they're calling cultivated meat. It doesn't sound very good. But basically what they're doing is they're taking the cells from cows or pigs or what have you, and then they're able to raise hamburger and hot dogs and sausages and so on from the cell. It's a remarkable technology. Apparently it's being used widely already in Singapore and Israel. There are lots of places that have done it. So it's not only far more humane, it's completely humane because you're not killing any animals, and it's completely safe. And it does seem very weird and strange, but then again, one day, hopefully not long from now, it's going to seem very weird and strange that we would kill cows or kill pigs or kill chickens in order to eat them and then raise them in these filthy, unsanitary, cruel conditions, and that spread disease. Tommy never failed to point out that coronavirus was an anagram for carnivorous. And it did start in the open meat markets in parts of China. But anyway, I became co-chair of this caucus to say, instead of investing in livestock and animal agriculture, let's invest in alternative proteins and let the animals live.
And as I mentioned to you the other night, we're doing some really great work on some research on that at Tufts, both I think at the Friedman School of Nutrition and elsewhere. So we'll make sure that your caucus make sure that the appropriators know to keep them adequately funded.
Absolutely. Well, and I want to make sure that there will be alternative protein options for everybody in the military and everybody in federal prisons and everybody in the Department of Agriculture and state cafeterias and so on. We got to make sure that the federal government is opening up people's minds.
So Kelly is up next on the screen to ask a question. Kelly.
Yes, hi, thank you so much. It's an honor to talk to you, Congressman Raskin. And I work at Tufts. I work in the Career Services Department advising on government, international affairs and policy career communities. So it's an honor to ask you this question, and to hear about the Democracy Summer Fellows is really exciting for opportunities for our students. And my question is, I was wondering currently, what efforts are underway as a country to start taking fake news very seriously, like some other parts of the world are?
Yeah, well, thank you, Kelly. I mean, it's an essential problem. It's something that the January 6th Select Committee is very focused on. I mean, there were 3 rings of seditious activity on January 6th. The outer ring was a mass protest that turned into mob violence based on propaganda and disinformation and lies. The middle ring was the ring of the insurrection with domestic violent extremist groups like the Proud Boys, who had been told to stand back and stand by at the first presidential debate, and the Oath Keepers and the 3%ers and the QAnon networks and the Aryan Nations and the militia groups and so on. Those people came after engaging in paramilitary training to storm our doors and smash our windows and attack our officers and help turn that demonstration into a mob and then to shut down the counting of the votes. But the very inner ring was a ring of the coup. And it's a weird word to use in American political parlance because we think of a coup as something that takes place against a president. And this was a coup organized by the president against the vice president and against the Congress in order to overthrow the Electoral College result and force the election into the House of Representatives for a so-called contingent election where we vote not one member, one vote, but one state, one vote. And Trump knew that they had 27 states to 22 to 1 Pennsylvania, which was divided down the middle 9-9. But even had they lost one of those states, Wyoming, because of my new best friend, Liz Cheney, not voting with them, they still would have had 26 votes, and then they would have declared martial law. All of that was made possible by lies, the big lie, fake news, propaganda, disinformation. So, hey, this is what academia is for. I mean, this is taking place in real time. I mean, just over the last 5 or 10 years. I read the book by the young man who defected from Cambridge Analytica. It's an amazing book about how they set about to use lies in order to specifically manipulate the American population and use Facebook to identify people who embodied, they called it the devil's triumvirate of psychological maladies, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism. Sound familiar? Well, that they basically looked for those people and then activated them. They also used Facebook in order to depress and demobilize the opposition. So when people tell me today they're depressed, they're burned out, I'm like, that is literally a strategy that came from Vladimir Putin and Cambridge Analytica and Donald Trump. Literally a strategy to demobilize and demoralize progressive and liberal people in the society. So don't fall for it.
So if we may, we have one more question, which is actually written in the chat, and I'm going to read it. And it is, it's another question about the media. Can the media handle the truth in the May congressional report on January 6th, or will they continue to muddy communications such that average Americans are uncertain about the true dangers and accountability for January 6th and continue to be thoroughly misled by disinformation arising from both domestic and international right-wing sources? Sort of follow on to Kelly's question.
Well, people are growing more and more conscious of it, more and more sophisticated about it, but you asked the right question. I mean, it remains to be seen, essentially. It is interesting to me, and it is uplifting for me to see, at least, that the struggle for democracy is the same struggle for the truth. Democracy is the system that operates on truth. You know, in a dictatorship or an autocracy, nobody expects the truth. People expect propaganda and disinformation. So fighting for the truth is the same thing as fighting for democracy. Democracy is not just, you know, one institution, much less one election. Or democracy is everything that has grown up here. I mean, it is the press, and it is the universities, and it is the vibrant social and civic life of the people, as well as the legislative institutions and the state and the local governments. All of that is democracy. So everybody who's going out there and rendering service by participating in any of these institutions is fortifying democracy. And then anybody who goes out and tells lies and spreads propaganda, disinformation, and hate is undermining it.
Well, Jamie, I want to thank you. First of all, thank you for spending this time with us. I appreciate your giving up your post-vote evening, or a good chunk of your evening. So go home and have dinner. I want to thank you for the book. It really is a powerful story, and I recommend it to everybody. And I'm delighted to know that it's now available in audio. I have some friends who at our ages, we're a little older, you know, rely mostly on audio to read books. But I want to thank you most of all for really giving us some hope, and for your optimism, your dedication to the public work that you do. We are all better off that you decided to, you know, move from professor to public servant. You are still a professor, and now you have, in addition, are a public servant. And I thank you. One of the things that I hope people will appreciate is the incredible role that you have played in this critical period, both as lead manager on impeachment, as a member of the select committee, as the source of wisdom on what was planned. All of those things. You're an invaluable member of the People's House, and I thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Alan, for those really lovely, kind words. And I'll try my best to live up to them. Thanks to everybody who came. I'm seeing friends, close friends of mine, like Doneen Williams, in the little chat on the side. I'm sorry I wasn't able to interact with everybody, but Tufts is such an extraordinary institution, very close to my heart. Thank you for everything that you guys are doing there on all of these fronts. And I hope to work closely with you going forward.
Look forward to it. Good night. Thanks so much, Jamie. Take care. Thank you all. Bye now.